Episode 8, a pilgrimage to Penrhys and a journey into the heart of Welsh coal country. In this episode of Tramping's Return to My Trees podcast, we'll be wandering through the Rhondda Fach and Rhondda Fach Valley area and heading up to Penrhys, which in the 14th and 15th century was one of the most important pilgrimage sites in all of the United Kingdom. From there, we'll be heading back down into the Rhondda Fach Valley and going to the little town of Ton Pentre, where one of the greatest coal finds ever was discovered. I've left the legacy of the Cymru disaster behind me and headed towards the far side of Porth, crossing the garish concrete and steel bridge that straddles the confluence of the Rhondda Fach and Fach, the big and small rivers, as it becomes one flowing downstream towards Pontypridd, where it joins the River Taff. Porth means gate in Welsh, and the town gets its name from being the gateway to the two river valleys. 40 years ago, this river would have been black as soot, polluted by mine water industrial tailings that were pumped directly into the river. When the mines had been at their peak a century before, domestic sewage from the towns also flowed into the river. It's a bit of an irony then that today, in 2024, as I'm walking around here and crossing, that we're facing a new scandal about sewage being pumped directly into our rivers. This time, though, it's coming from the water companies that are meant to be protecting the rivers themselves. You can't make it up, really. My route today aims to bisect the Rhondda Fach and Fach valleys by climbing up over Mynydd Troedyrw, which confusingly translates as the mountain at the foot of the hill. And I'm going to go by way of a bridle way and a public footpath. The path begins at the driveway of a set of farm buildings situated at the very top of a very, very steep street. Rusting, stripped-down cars lay discarded around the yard, and what once had probably been the main farmhouse and now appears to be mainly inhabited by chickens. The path climbs above the local cemetery until it reaches the outer perimeter of Rhondda Golf Club. Below me, I can see Stanley Town and Tylers Town, once thriving coal villages named after English engineers who came to speculate for coal. Today, both villages sat stranded and forgotten in the steep glacial valley of the Rhondda Fach. Now, back in 2020, when I first did this walk, Tylers Town had been in the news, but not for good reasons. In February that year, what used to be called unprecedented heavy rainfall caused a 60,000-ton landslide at the site of the old coal tip above the town. You can still see it from where I am. It's like a wide black scar on the hillside across from this part of the mountain. Looking down at Tylers Town, it's hard not to think about another village just a few miles northeast of here, Aberfan. On October the 21st, 1966, at around 9:15 a.m, a coal tip that had been piled on a mountain slope above the town gave way, sending an avalanche of slurry pouring down upon Penrhys Junior School, where the young students had just started their lessons. The entire school was engulfed in the avalanche, and local people were forced to dig with their hands in a desperate and ultimately futile attempt to save the children. 109 pupils and 5 teachers died that morning. The Aberfan disaster shocked the entire United Kingdom, reminding a nation of the brutal reality of its heavy industrial legacy. That shock turned to anger as it became clear the accident could have been prevented. Reports revealed that the coal waste had been dumped over a natural spring, and that the government-run National Coal Board had been aware that the tip was unstable. The tribunal, convened to investigate the disaster, laid the blame squarely on the Coal Board, writing that the Aberfan disaster could and should have been prevented. Today, there seems a very real danger that another Aberfan-style disaster might occur in the future. According to a recent report commissioned by the Welsh Government, the Tylerstown tip was just one of nearly 300 old dumping grounds across the South Wales valleys that are a significant risk of slippage, a threat that geologists warn is exacerbated by climate change. Ahead of me, in the distance, isolated on the top of a mountain, is one of Wales's most misguided urban experiments. A 1960s public housing project intended to provide support for the mining community, but which quickly became a symbol of neglect and decline. The Penrhys estate had been unveiled, inauspiciously it would turn out, on Friday the 13th of September 1968. It sat high on a hill above its immediate neighbours, the villages of Llwynapir to the southwest and Tylerstown to the east. Its design was distinctly modern, a maze of concrete pods that was the very opposite of the compact terraced houses that hug the sides of the valleys down below. It had been built to provide affordable housing for coal miners and their families, but with the coal industry in steep decline, most of its first residents were unemployed and had been forced to relocate there by the local town councils. As one local wrote in a letter to the Rhondda Leader newspaper, "It's a ghost town before it even starts." Whether it was warranted or not, the estate quickly gained a reputation for being a dysfunctional dumping ground for families who had fallen through the cracks. By the 1980s, unemployment on the estate stood at 93%, and arson and street violence were rife. In the 1990s, nearly two-thirds of the estate was demolished, with the remaining houses given a facelift. Today, just 800 people live in Penrhys. However, they enjoy some of the best views in South Wales. So you can see how, over the past 50 years, Penrhys had developed a reputation as a place to avoid. Back in medieval times, however, this was the place to visit, perhaps the most important destination in all of Wales for the pious and wealthy, as they embraced pilgrimage, one of the earliest forms of tourism. The modern Penrhys was even built on the site of a manor house and hostel affiliated to the great Cistercian abbey at Llantarnam. The central attraction for medieval pilgrims was the shrine of the Virgin Mary, located next to a holy well, Ffynnon St. Mary's Well. According to local legend, a beautiful statue of the Virgin Mary had first appeared in the branches of an oak tree near the well. People tried to take the statue from the oak, but even the combined efforts of 8 oxen could not release it. Only when the monks of Llantarnam built a chapel to celebrate the shrine was the statue set free by the oak. As the story spread, the monks had to build a hostel to accommodate all the pilgrims who came to see the miracle. By the 15th century, Penrhys's reputation as a holy site was known far and wide. Gwilym II, a famous Welsh bard of the time, described Penrhys as an island at the forest's edge, with consecrated bread and holy water. Such was the importance of Penrhys to the Catholic Church in Wales that when Henry VIII set about the dissolution of the monasteries in 1536, his consigliere, Thomas Cromwell, dispatched local officials to destroy the shrine and seize the statue. In 1538, it was taken to London, where it was publicly burned with other sacred Catholic artefacts. However, the Holy Well survived the attack, and Penrhys's reputation only increased. Folk tales recount how travellers, lost in the mountain mist, would be guided to safety by a tall female figure carrying a light. I'm going to take a walk now, just slightly down the hill, following the trail to where you can get to the Holy Well, Mary's Holy Well. You can still visit it. It lies very much off the beaten and muddy track. It's some 200 feet below a replacement modern statue shrine to Mary that was erected at the top of the hill, where I was just now, in 1953. To be honest, the well isn't much to look at nowadays. The spring is protected by a nondescript stone cradle and has none of the tourism information you might expect, explaining a place of such historical and spiritual importance. But, as with so many parts of Welsh history, it's a bit of a hidden gem, and if you know where to look, you can find it. I've left Our Lady of Penrhys and I'm heading down the mountain, following the road to Ystrad and then on to Ton Pentre. Above me, the tightly planted conifers of Penrhys Wood sprout up above Mynydd Tîn Til. From a distance, the mountain looks like it's got a Mohican haircut. Below me, the narrow river valley is rammed and crammed with terrace houses, so that you can't really tell where Llwyn y Pier ends, where Ystrad begins, where Ystrad ends, where Gethley begins, where Gethley ends, and Ton Pentre begins. Back in 1851, less than 1,000 people lived in Rhondda Fach. By 1911, the population had jumped to 150,000. The catalyst was coal, but not the coking variety James Insull first exploited in Cummer. No. What made this part of Wales so important to the global economy was a new seam of coal found much deeper underground, anthracite, or steam coal as it became known. The steam engine revolution, powered by steam coal, had been slowly transforming industrial output across the United Kingdom for nearly 50 years. However, in 1851, a new report by the British Admiralty dramatically changed the fortunes of the coal mines of South Wales. It concluded that for the British Navy to command hegemony across the high seas, it would require a constant supply of Welsh steam coal because it burned cleaner and longer than other veins of coal. That meant the Navy ships would be harder to spot at sea and they would need to carry less of it. Soon, Welsh steam coal was in demand throughout the world. Steam engine technology also had allowed mine owners to drill deeper pits, so new collieries sprung up throughout South Wales in rapid succession. The Insull family had been trading steam coal since the 1830s, but now their wealth, along with other coal merchants, soared as new concessions opened throughout the valleys. Building and maintaining those new mines required large amounts of pitwood. So, once more, forests and woodland were harvested for industry. Now, that didn't mean these new industrial giants destroyed the woodlands. Much of the pitwood they needed was sourced from local oak woodlands that were coppiced to allow regrowth. As Oliver Rackham explains in his book Woodlands, the thesis that woods were destroyed by heavy industries cannot be sustained. On the contrary, wherever there remained a big concentration of woodland, there is an industrial or urban use to account for its preservation. However, due to the high demand for timber, many landowners started to convert ancient oak woods into new plantations, consisting of fast-growing softwoods such as larch and conifers. Some of the biggest mines had direct connections to these forestry estates, but even that supply wasn't enough. Soon, the mine owners were buying vast amounts of timber from all over Wales. By the late 19th century, Wales was importing large quantities of pitwood from Europe. 226,000 tonnes arrived in Cardiff alone in 1882, according to local records. You wouldn't know it today, but 150 years ago, Ton Pentre was the most important steel coal centre in the world. A boom or bust tale that rivals the great oil discoveries at Oil City in Pennsylvania or Spindletop in Texas. I've been walking through Ton Pentre and I've just come to the top of the village, and I've taken a little path that's going to take me out up onto the Bulch mountain trail. And the reason I've come here is because there was quite a lot of traffic down in the village, but now I've got up here, there's a bit of a breeze, so bear with me, and hopefully you'll be able to understand and hear everything I'm talking about. So how did Ton Pentre become the Spindletop of Wales? Well, in 1864, David Davis, the successful railway owner from Llandinam in mid-Wales, took out a mining lease on land just above the current town of Ton Pentre. For nearly 15 months, Davies's men searched for a workable seam of coal, with no luck. The cost of prospecting exhausted Davies's funds, so one morning he gathered the men together to pay them their final wages. To demonstrate how he'd run out of money, Davies put his hands in his pocket, took out his last half-crown and held it aloft. "There you are. That's all I've got," he said. Someone in the crowd shouted back, "Well, we'll have that as well." Davies, possibly out of disgust or maybe just resigned to his fate, threw the last coin into the crowd. The workers were so impressed by the gesture that they voted, then and there, to dig for one more week without pay. On the very last day, they hit upon a thick seam of steam coal, one of the biggest strikes ever in South Wales. David Davies's business was saved, and the Rhondda Fach Valley would never be the same. So I'm continuing up this slightly muddy, single-track, winding path that leads onto the Buch. I'm pretty weary after quite a long day, so I'm taking it easier on this final stretch up the mountain. Halfway up, someone has installed a park bench high on one side of the ridge. I do a quick check of Google, and do you know what it says? The location is tagged as Percy's Tiny Bench. Now, I don't know who Percy was, but it's not that tiny, and he'd have to get up quite high to get to it. Below me, I can see the village of Penrhys and its namesake forest. Remember, I saw it when we were coming down from Penrhys as well. The last time I was here, I'd been doing some reconnaissance walking with friends. We'd stopped at the same place, and as we rested on the brow, we could just make out a figure waving at us from across the valley, just below the forest tree line. This was in the height of lockdown, so there were people out and about, but it was still kind of strange to see someone over there in quite a desolate place. It was a man in his early 30s or 40s perhaps. He had his arms spread wide and was singing. Actually, he was bellowing, "My Henwlad van Hadau, land of my fathers," the Welsh national anthem. And he was belting it out just as if he'd been among 70,000 other supporters at Cardiff's Principality Stadium cheering on the Welsh rugby team. Except he was on his own and literally rocking the valley with his passion. Now, if this reads like a cliche, Welshman sings national anthem halfway up a valley, well, honestly, it truly happened. And the story gets stranger still, because Welsh national anthem had been composed just a few miles away in Pontypridd back in 1856. Originally, it was a hymn titled Glan Rhondda. Over the years, it gained great popularity at music and other cultural festivals throughout Wales. However, My Henwlad van Hadau wouldn't be adopted as Wales's national anthem until 1905, when it was sung at the very first international rugby match between Wales and the New Zealand All Blacks, the so-called Game of the Century, as both teams were considered the strongest in the world at that time. The backstory is uncanny given where my friends and I back then were standing, looking back down the Rhondda Fach towards Penrhys and the town of Ton Pentre. According to the official history of Welsh Rugby Union, the idea to sing the song came from Tom Williams, a former Welsh international player who in 1905 was one of the selectors of the national team. He had been born into a farming family around Penrhys and still worked as a solicitor in the town. The All Blacks were famous, even back then, for the Maori-inspired war dance known as the haka that they performed before kick-off. Williams suggested to the Welsh team that they sing My Henwlad van Hadau as a response to the haka, and the idea was embraced by Wales's biggest newspaper, the Western Mail. In the build-up to the match, the paper encouraged fans also to sing the anthem at the match. As the story goes, once the All Blacks finished performing the haka, the Welsh players, led by its captain, Teddy Morgan, broke into song. More than 40,000 Welsh fans joined in, and a tradition was born. From that day on, my Hen Vlad van Hadau was adopted as the Welsh national anthem, even though the official one was supposed to be God Bless the Prince of Wales. You've been listening to Return to My Trees, a Tramping podcast. It was narrated by Matthew Yeomans and edited by Dylan Yeomans. The musical interludes are by the folk duo Filkin's Drift. Join us for the next episode, where we delve even deeper into the woodlands of Wales.